By rung 4 of a corrupt customs officer. Half the people in this game are dead, doing time, or in witness protection. You wear a government badge the whole way. That is what makes the ladder expensive for everyone else. Look, this ladder is not every customs officer. Most do the job straight and carry the boredom, the shift work, and the low gratitude that comes with it. This ladder is the minority who rent out state power. 5 rungs: entry, lieutenant, operator, middle management, top. Year 5 is the question. On this ladder, outcomes sort into 4 boxes. Prison is the common result at rung 1 and rung 2. Promotion is rare and usually bought with silence. By rung 5, the exits narrow to death, near-life prison, cooperation, or disappearing somewhere nobody asks questions. At rung 1, you think you found easy side money. You really found a camera angle and a disciplinary file. Pay runs about $200 to $2,000 a week in cash, gifts, prepaid cards, or somebody else covering your debts after a shift. The lifestyle is small and visible. A better phone, rent paid on time, drinks after work, maybe a used car that costs too much for your grade. The risk is immediate. Internal affairs, a random audit, an angry traveler, a crew deciding you already know too much. The typical person is young, often 22 to 30, new enough to think procedure is flexible, and old enough to need money. Court files around Newark and Miami show officers taking payments to wave through luggage or skip secondary inspection. Victim cost is community overdose, trafficking victims moved onward, and families losing a salary when the badge goes. A documented example sits in federal court from JFK. Former Customs and Border Protection Officer Jean-Claude Dillon Toussaint was convicted in a cocaine importation conspiracy after using his position to help smugglers bypass inspection points. Sentence length ran into years in federal prison. Body count attached to the cargo is usually indirect, but never zero. At rung 2, you think you run favors. You really manage exposure. Pay jumps to $5,000 to $20,000 a month because now you are arranging which officer looks away, which shift gets covered, which paperwork gap survives review. The count starts here. So does the burner phone habit. Lifestyle changes first in your head. You stop sleeping clean, you rotate numbers, avoid old friends at the terminal, and keep one story for home and another for work. The typical person is 28 to 35, already burned once by debt, divorce, gambling, or an earlier suspension. Risk gets organized. The first wire shows up here. The first cooperator usually comes from below. One court-documented pattern came out of the Newark cargo corridor, where corrupt workers and officials coordinated access around controlled inspections. Sentences commonly land in the 5 to 12-year range. Family losses are mortgage default, legal fees, and children learning visitation schedules. At rung 3, you think you are finally insulated. The truth is you are now worth indicting. Pay reaches $50,000 to $200,000 a month because you are no longer selling single passes, manipulating inspection priorities, and keeping paperwork calm enough for bigger people to sleep. The lifestyle starts to look legal from the street. A modest house, an accountant, a lawyer on retainer, school tuition paid on time. Your family does not know specifics because specifics become evidence. Typical age is 30 to 45. You have enough rank or connections to touch staffing and information. A court file that shows the scale came out of the Port of Newark and Elizabeth corruption cases, where officials and port-linked workers were charged in schemes tied to container movement and contraband access. This rung attracts conspiracy counts in federal prison terms well into double digits. Victim cost scales with every container. Year 5 ends in indictment, promotion, or cooperation. At rung 4, you think you left the dock behind. You did not. You just moved the dock into conference rooms. Pay runs roughly $500,000 to $5 million a year through cash, shell income, consulting fiction, or relatives holding title. By rung 4, the math doesn't work anymore. Lifestyle gets quiet. Real estate sits in 3 names. A child goes to private school under a softened story about what you do. You eat in closed rooms, not loud ones. Risk turns existential because you are too useful to quit and too visible to vanish. Typical age sits around 35 to 55. One documented story worth naming is CBP officer Robert Hall, convicted in a scheme involving bribery and allowing drug-laden vehicles through his lane at the border. Federal prosecutors described repeated corruption tied to organized smuggling. Sentence length was measured in years, not months. The victim cost was every downstream shipment and every death attached to it. Family loss at this rung is larger than seized cash. Houses get forfeited. Spouses sit through trial beside reporters. Parents answer for you at church, school, and funeral homes. Typical body count is still indirect on paper, but fentanyl, trafficking, and armed load protection mean people die far from your desk because your stamp kept moving. At Rung 5, the movies lie to you. The top corrupt customs officer does not look glamorous. The top looks tired. Pay over a career can clear 20 million, and in rare multinational cases, much more. Liquidity is the problem because lawyers, security, hidden travel, and loyalty payments eat the number back. Lifestyle is gated, watched, and lonely. You do not patrol, you wait. You spend your days inside official channels and your nights wondering which phone is already in evidence. Typical person is 40 plus and in deep enough that retirement requires an exit plan, a deal, or a cemetery. The big documented story in this lane is not one perfect mastermind, but repeated top-rung border corruption prosecutions where supervisors, inspectors, and networked facilitators sold official discretion to major smuggling organizations. Federal outcomes at this level are usually 15 years to life. Death comes by rival cleanup, stress, suicide, or state force. Quiet retirement is rare. Year 5 from the top gives you 4 doors. Prison with enough time that grandchildren know you through glass. Death, sometimes publicly, often by heart failure before sentencing. Exit through cooperation or witness protection, which means your name survives better than your face. Promotion hardly exists because there is no real rung above principle. Look, after enough years around this ladder, the ratio stays ugly. For every operator who keeps money, dozens of strangers carry the cost through addiction, extortion, trafficking, overdose, or taxes funding the cleanup. The top salary is mostly notional after lawyers, seized assets, and protection. Year 5 still sorts into death, prison, exit, or rare promotion. Climb carefully. Every rung pays, and every rung charges. Most rungs end somewhere you wouldn't visit on purpose. Which rung is just a worse version of a legal job you've had?